polls, particularly polls in the American political system, are, like beauty in the eye of the beholder. You can, people look upon polls and take out different interpretations and meanings. And in fact, Gallup, who pioneered polling, modern American political polling, no longer does political polling in terms of presidential races because they become very politicized. So I think it's important to note that polling is done far more on a political basis in, say, particularly since probably the 1996 election and definitely the 2000 election in the United States. They're also a very effective way of suppressing vote. Polls can be brutal in terms of their effect on voter suppression. Polls can be are an extremely effective psychological warfare tool to be used against not necessarily the candidate, but the candidate's voter base and those voters that are sitting on the fence and deciding whether or not they want to vote in terms of their voter base. If voters see who are leaning toward the specific candidate, they see a horrendous poll that just seems to paint a bleak picture. The effect has been well documented that they may just stay home and say, well, we've lost already. And in terms of voters who are sitting on the fence looking to make a decision, well, this is definitely true in America, not so the rest of the world. But those persons that are sitting on the fence looking, nobody ever wants to back a loser. And that's unique to America. Voting and the population of European countries are far more sophisticated and less simplistic. The same goes for nations and countries. Iran is a perfect example as well that has, a very effective system of voting. And America, the United States, has so corrupted the concept of democracy, the concept of voting, the concept of public participation in public policy, that they no longer try to conceal it anymore. It's widely discussed. Now, with regard to Secretary Clinton and Donald Trump, you've seen these polls that have been very volatile from day one. The only consistent polls of the whole season thus far were those that were taken in the Republican primary, which showed that with the exception of two small time frames, two small windows, Trump led the field from the time he entered the race to the time he effectively wrapped up the nomination when Ted Cruz withdrew after the Indiana primary. Now, there is some thought that the reason for that was that they're, on the part of Secretary Clinton's base of support, which includes a corrupt American media, that Donald Trump was a candidate that she wanted to run against from the very beginning, and so there was a desire to paint a picture of Trump as consistently winning, so as to create momentum in his primary battle against 16 other opponents. And then in the general, of course, the opposite. We're seeing the opposite. We now see that Trump is talking about a rigged system and talking about the polls in a less favorable light. He did not have the same position on polls when he was consistently the leader in the polls. Where does all this end up? I consistently make the statement that American democracy, so-called democracy in the United States, is specifically designed to prevent change. And this is why you see a tremendous arsenal of psychological warfare tactics, downright corrupt tactics to assure a Hillary Clinton victory in November. Now, that is by no means an endorsement on my part of Donald Trump, but let's understand that the political establishment, the Jewish Zionist neocon establishment that really came of age and revealed themselves in the George W. Bush presidency, and then continued to dominate the foreign policies and some domestic policies of Barack Obama, are fully behind Secretary Clinton because she will change nothing. Her domestic policies, her foreign policies will be identical to George W. Bush's and Barack Obama's, who, by the way, their policies were nearly identical. The political establishment, which includes the military-industrial complex, defense contractors, people that are pro-war, that still have a desire for hegemony, American hegemony in the world, and if they have to use military force, they will. All of those elements are backing Secretary Clinton because she has consistently never saw war or conflict or the imposition of American imperialism that she did not approve of. And while that may be hard for her younger millennial and more progressive left-wing base to acknowledge, they know that it's a fact. And it's the reason also in the polls, well, she may be showing, the polls may be showing that she is ahead of Donald Trump. You would think with all of his foibles, with all of his character flaws, with all of his statements, that she should be 20 and 25 points ahead, and that's not the case. And I think the reason for that is she has not fully incorporated Bernie Sanders supporters and a large swath of traditional Democrats that believe in supporting children, child care, the elderly, the Hubert Humphrey Democrats. They certainly are not with and George McGovern, I might say, the Hubert Humphrey, George McGovern type Democrats as well as the progressives. She's not been able to solidify their support. So regardless of the polls, I still predict that there is a strong likelihood of a Donald Trump victory, much to my chagrin and much to the endangerment of world peace, because there is a larger portion of the American population that understand that the government and the political system of the United States has gone from being a very admirable dream. It is now something that is imposed upon the American population and is now used to suppress the American population. And we see this in the militarization of police forces, the brutal beatings and killings of African Americans, poor whites, Latinos. I dare say we see a lot of inconsistency on the part of the political system and on the part of Secretary Clinton and the Democrats. On one hand, they court and talk very fondly to these elements which I just referred to, while at the same time fully endorsing and relying on their support, meaning the police state, to keep them in power.